Hello fellow AP students, and welcome to my video analysis today. So what I've prepared here is really a simple analysis of my thesis, and from that I'm going to gauge its relevance to all of us in our generation as we grow up here, and we're going to soon be able to partake in the political discourse of our nation, so I figured that this is a pretty important topic to cover here. And with this, my thesis, or simply just what I believe here, is that Alexander Hamilton and his philosophies greatly shaped and are integral not only to the formation of our nation, but also to America today. And his influence can still be felt in really all aspects of our government, but mainly his political thought influenced our strong executive branch and our system of economic policies. However, the effects of these expand vastly beyond his initial sphere of influence. First, let's talk about the executive branch. Now, some historians call Hamilton a monarchist because of his belief in strong central government. Brandeis University even explains this by tracing his branding all the way back to Jefferson. Quote, "They branded Hamilton a monarchist and a monocrat, even if Hamilton never himself referred to his own thought in those words following the respectful repudiation of the avowedly monarchical stance he had taken in the Philadelphia Convention." End quote. However, I would reserve the term Federalist. Alexander never wanted a monarchy as much as any other founding father did not. In fact, Hamilton was one of the most balanced thinkers at the time, with one of his main arguments for a stronger executive being that the balance would outweigh the domineering legislative branch. Hamilton didn't just want any person in charge either. There had to be provisions, and a quote from Federalist 70 goes as follows, quote, "The ingredients which constitute energy in the executive are first, unity, secondly, duration, thirdly, an adequate provision for its support, and fourthly, competent powers." End quote. Hamilton wants a man who would make decisive decisions and bring this certain energy into a common productive good. He simply just wants a strong leader, someone like George Washington, for instance. And nowadays, that is translated into strong leaders such as Ronald Reagan, or even FDR, who have enjoyed the president's power to expand civil liberties and rights for all of us. Now, the president has procured some limitations over time, but they still enjoy a large power, and this is certainly expanded with the creation of bureaucratic agencies. Along with this, back to the balance aspect, Hamilton wrote Federalist 78 to speak about adding balance to the Supreme Court as well. Hamilton wanted a court to truly be supreme at the highest level, and thus he wanted them to have the power of interpreting the Constitution, which was, in fact, the supreme law of the land. With this, he wanted the courts to have the power to disavow any legislative act that violated the supreme law. Quote, "No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution can be valid." End quote. In effect, Hamilton laid out the principles of judicial review 20 years before they were even adopted as a practice. Now, judicial review was something that was adopted in 1803 with the Supreme Court case of Marbury v. Madison. And during this, they adopted judicial review, which was, in fact, exactly what Hamilton has laid out. It gives the Supreme Court the power to interpret the Constitution and then apply their own law to determine if a law is constitutional or not, and then thus if it would be supported or not by the Supreme Court. Now, this is very groundbreaking, and it's been used in every single Supreme Court since that day. So really, in effect, Hamilton did more than any other founding father to create the courts that we now live with today, and has granted us these Supreme Courts that have expanded our civil liberties far beyond what was granted back in the 1780s with the Constitution. Finally, we have Hamilton's probably his most important contributions and his everlasting, which would be his mathematical and economic genius. Hamilton's conservative beliefs are still used today as the basic background for the Republican platform. And that's basically a testament to how effective and potent they are. Really laissez-faire, and all of the conservative economic ideas kind of stemmed from him and Adam Smith, and they're still being used to this day. The imaginative conservative states that Hamilton, quote, "believed that a diversified economy engaged in agriculture, commerce, and manufacturing was more likely to protect the nation than a one-dimensional agrarian economy that was advocated by Jefferson and even former Federalist Madison." End quote. This was certainly adopted in America and is fitting, as traditionally And to this day, we always have our industrial regions and our agrarian ones. And when one fails, the other is always there to keep the nation going. Now, sensing that the economic life was in transition, he regarded economic self-sufficiency touted by Republicans as the path to happiness, as a romantic illusion. A modern economy, Hamilton really believed, required financial institutions like banks as a means for regulating currency. And as we're going to see, this is how he created the Treasury. In his magnum opus called Assumption, he said the United States needed to pay down its debt and increase the flow of investment capital if we're going to generate enough wealth to fund future debt, a military, or the infrastructure. His taxing system, it was pretty unpopular as any taxing system you would expect, but it provided a source of revenue that was certainly lacking during the War for Independence and under the Articles. And so he asserted that taxes should be pretty modest so that it won't choke off the production of wealth from which the tax revenue was generated. And so this thought is really translated into the modern day, and it's easily seen in the economics of Ronald Reagan, Reaganomics, or Donald Trump, who's trying to follow Ronald Reagan. And really, what they have done is exposed what is called the Laffer curve, which is how much you can tax with it being the most effective. Basically saying that we need lower taxes that will have the upper class spend more, and then that will trickle down into the lower classes. So tax the rich less so that they spend more into the system. So essentially, this has been one of the most everlasting. However, his creation of the Treasury is obviously up there too. And it's been the backbone of all banks in our financial system since the 1700s, and to this day regulates our nation, which has the largest GDP of $18.5 trillion. And that's something Hamilton would have never imagined, but nonetheless, it's all based and carried out using his genius. Now, what is the point of me supporting my thesis here? Well, really, it's to look at the effects that his ideas have on us as budding Americans about to enter the political world with our own power in this democracy. Because of Hamilton and his capitalist beliefs, we are free to choose really whatever we want to pursue as a career. And if we want to move up in the social ladder, we could do that too, because this is all possible with the economic freedoms and the laissez-faire and the conservative economic policies that Hamilton really got the stone rolling for. He demanded unity and balance and made our government really more responsive to the people in this way, us the constituents. And his complicated beliefs in federalism make government, as I said, more responsible through all the way through the top to the localities, through the complex layers of federalism. So it allows us 300 million American citizens to all have our own role in the nation. And next, as I stated before, the Supreme Court really is, they have no greater credit to than any other man than Alexander Hamilton, in my opinion. And the next Supreme Court case that's going to grant civil rights, that's going to define our generation, just as Hodges versus Obergefell did, it's going to be because of Hamilton's argument for judicial review, really. I want all of us to see that his legacy extends beyond a portrait on the $10 bill or a Broadway musical, but that really our future in America was made possible by the beliefs of Hamilton. Now, to end this, I just have a little interactive. I want you to choose which pop-up is correct to this question. And you may or may not know it, but I think it's just a little something fun and interactive to do. So the question is, where was Alexander Hamilton born?